On February 4th in the year 2000, a taxi driver operating from Kitengela was hired to drop off some kids from school. As he was driving the kids home at around 5 p.m. that Friday evening, he spotted something unusual along one of the dirt roads in the outskirts of Kitengela town. He saw something that looked like a pair of legs protruding from a bush. He immediately stopped the car to take a closer look. That's when he discovered a lifeless body of an adult male. The man had his hands tied to his back with a scissor rope, and his face looked like he had been beaten and had his head bashed with a blunt object. The taxi driver reported this discovery to Kitengela police. The deceased man would later be identified as 55-year-old Lawrence Githinji Magondu. Magondu was one of the most renowned land brokers and real estate dealers in Nairobi at the time. A post-mortem examination would later reveal that he died from blunt force trauma. And so the police had a daunting task ahead of them, trying to uncover the killers and the motive for the killing. But no one would have predicted the complex nature that this case was about to take. The investigators were about to uncover a crazy conspiracy involving multiple parties, and where a former top government official was also implicated. I have to admit that I did find this case interesting and, quite honestly, shocking. This case formed the basis of a very significant landmark matter in Kenya, which was the case that got rid of the mandatory death sentence in the country. So, please stick around for all the gist on this one. Welcome back to the Crime Gist. My name is Damisa. Lawrence Githinji Magondu was born in Gitengela village in Nyeri County in 1945. He spent his entire childhood and teenage years in Nyeri County. Even from a young age, he was described as smart and ambitious and someone whose age mates admired and looked up to. It therefore didn't come as a surprise to many when he would later in life pursue a career in teaching. Upon completing his education, he followed what he felt was his calling at the time, becoming a teacher in various primary schools around the country. In his mid-20s, he married the love of his life and the lady who would later mother his 4 children. But as his family grew, Magondu began to look for something outside of his teaching job to sustain his family's growing needs. In his quest for more, he would engage in various business initiatives and pursue several interests before settling on real estate and land agency. He had finally found a new interest that he enjoyed more than his teaching job. He started buying and selling property, aiming to become a trusted land dealer in Nairobi and its environs. Over the years, he would develop a solid work ethic and unwavering devotion to his new career, which in turn led him to securing several lucrative land deals. By the time the year 2000 rolled in, Magondu had made his mark in the real estate world, amassed a fortune, and made very powerful connections along the way. But little did he know that this job he loved so much would be the very thing used to seal his fate. So I'm sure you are wondering, how then did Magondu end up dead on that dirt road in the outskirts of Kitengela? Well, it all began with a seemingly innocent phone call made on 17th January of that year, that is the year 2000. A client named Wilson Mwangi Dhirimbu called Magondu, claiming that he and his sister wanted to purchase a piece of land in Kitengela area. The following day, 18th January, they met when this Dhirimbu came into Magondu's office in Nairobi CBD. The two talked a bit and arranged to meet in about 2 weeks, that is on 4th February in Kitengela, so they could go see the piece of property and negotiate from there. Very early on February 4th, 2000, the buyer, Wilson Dhirimbu, called Magondu, confirming that they were still on. So Magondu, accompanied by his loyal driver Harrison King'ori, embarked on a journey to Kitengela. They arrived at the meeting spot at around 10 a.m. and waited for the buyer. Moments later, a white Toyota Corolla pulled up. 5 individuals emerged from the vehicle, among them Mr. Wilson Dhirimbu and a lady he identified as his sister, Anna Ngonyo. The two were accompanied by 3 other men known as Stephen Wambua, Stephen Kagia, and David Karoga Njuguna. Dhirimbu and his sister Anna were both very smartly dressed and were the supposed main buyers of the property. The other 3 men were a bit shabbily dressed. Wilson Dhirimbu introduced them as his workmen or handymen and said that he had tagged them along so they could fence the piece of land as soon as it was declared theirs. Dhirimbu then opened the boot of his car and showed Magondu what was in there. There was a roll of barbed wire, 2 pangas, a crowbar, 2 iron bars, along with other materials that he said would be needed for fencing. He wanted to know if these tools were appropriate for the job. These tools would play a major role in the events that would later follow. Wilson Dhirimbu then requested Magondu to give him and his sister a tour of the area to familiarize themselves with the land. They got into 2 cars with Magondu Dhirimbu and his sister Anna getting into Wilson Dhirimbu's car. All the others got into Magondu's car, which was being driven by his driver King'ori. They made their way to the land somewhere past Kitengela town. When they got there, they began making rounds, checking out the piece of land. Anna said that she had her eyes set on constructing a makuti bar, eagerly scanning the surroundings for a perfect spot. The other 3 men, who had been following closely behind, stood at a distance and let the main parties of the deal talk. They were just there to help fence the land after all. King'ori followed his boss Magondu in helping him show the buyers around the land. After a few rounds, Wilson Dhirimbu asked Magondu if there were any other available pieces of land that were situated in Kitengela area that they could see before coming up with a decision. Being a land agent, of course, he had a few other options available. Again, Magondu, Anna, and Wilson Dhirimbu got into Dhirimbu's car, the Toyota Corolla, and the rest of the group got into Magondu's car. They left, headed in the direction of Kitengela town to the next piece of land. When they got to a place known as Masai Ostrich Farm, Dhirimbu's car stopped at a distance and Anna, Dhirimbu, and Magondu alighted. They went into a shop and emerged a few minutes later, each with a bottle of mineral water. King'ori, as expected, had stopped nearby to wait for them to come back. It was around 11:30 a.m. at this point. After buying the water, Wilson Dhirimbu walked to the second car where King'ori and the handyman were waiting. He asked King'ori if he could find them a good place in Kitengela town where they could order and have lunch. He then went into his pocket and gave King'ori 1,000 shillings, asking him to go into town and make the order as the rest of the group continue on to survey the next piece of land. At this point, 2 of the men who were in King'ori's car, that is David Njuguna and Stephen Kagia, joined Dhirimbu's car. So King'ori was left with only one of Dhirimbu's men, that is Stephen Wambua. Dhirimbu's car then sped off, taking a dirt road, as King'ori and Wambua headed to Kitengela town to order some nyama choma. King'ori had no idea that this was just a ploy to separate him from the rest of the group and get him away from his boss. As for the occupants of Dhirimbu's car, the moment they had been waiting for was finally here. Within a few minutes, the men jumped on Magondu and began raining blows on him, before tying up his hands with a sisal rope. They continued on along the dirt road until they reached a secluded spot where they came to a stop. It was here that the unthinkable happened. Magondu was brutally attacked and murdered using the very tools he had been shown earlier. His life was ended in such a brutal way. The killers dumped his body in the nearby bush and sped off again towards Kitengela town. Back in Kitengela town, King'ori and Stephen Wambua had ordered lunch, nyama choma, at Torino Butchery. They were patiently awaiting the return of Magondu and the rest of the group. Soon, King'ori saw the vehicle his boss had rode in, that is Dirimbu's car, pass by. Immediately, a sense of unease washed over him, wondering why the team was not stopping for food. But then, Dirimbu's car came to a stop a distance away. Stephen Kagia, one of the men who had moved to Dirimbu's car earlier, came out and ran towards Torino Butchery where Stephen Wambua and King'ori were waiting. In what seemed like a matter of urgency, he urged King'ori to get into his boss's car and follow Dirimbu's car towards Nairobi. Kagia told King'ori that his boss Magondu was already in Dirimbu's car. He added that Magondu wanted to first rush somewhere along Mombasa Road close to Mlolongo to show them another piece of land before coming back for lunch. King'ori felt uneasy. He had a bad feeling and started resisting, insisting that his boss's car didn't have enough fuel for another trip. He said that he wanted to talk to his boss. Kagia insisted that his boss was in a hurry, saying that they would refuel on the way. Convinced, King'ori got into his boss's car together with Stephen Kagia and Stephen Wambua and followed Dirimbu's car from Kitengela town towards Mlolongo. At this point, King'ori was being led into a trap unbeknownst to him. He, however, continued having a bad feeling that he couldn't ignore. His suspicion only grew when, on Mombasa Road, he tried to overtake Dirimbu's car, peeped into it, and noticed that he couldn't see his boss in there. Concerned, he asked Kagia yet again where his boss was, but Stephen Kagia insisted that he was in the next car, probably sleeping on the back seat. The two cars veered past Mlolongo on Mombasa Road. They then took a certain beaten path near the old Mombasa Road to a secluded spot overlooking the Nairobi National Park. There, Dirimbu's car blocked the road ahead of the other car, forcing it to also come to a stop. Within a few seconds, King'ori was ambushed. The occupants of both cars all alighted and dragged King'ori out of Magondu's car. There, in broad daylight, he was mercilessly attacked and beaten. The assailants, believing that they had ended him, left him for dead before speeding off towards the city. But fate had other plans for King'ori because, against all odds, he survived this brutal assault. He was rescued by a group of good Samaritans who stumbled upon his battered body. His resilience and will to live would prove to be the key that unlocked the truth behind Magondu's murder. The news of Magondu's murder and King'ori's attempted murder spread rapidly, and the investigation team quickly sprang into action. They knew where to start since they had King'ori alive to identify the perpetrators and help uncover what had happened. The authorities, recognizing the importance of King'ori's testimony, placed him under 24-hour police protection. King'ori started by identifying the car driven by the suspects. Investigators followed up with that and did manage to track the car. They revealed that the Toyota Corolla registration number KAK004J had been hired by one Wilson Dirimbu on 4th February. When they checked the car, they found a copy of a national ID belonging to Wilson Dirimbu. That information led them to the Rimbos' home in Uthiru, where they arrested him on 8th February. In his home, they found some weapons and the original ID that matched the copy they had found in the hired car. The Rimbu, cornered and with no way to escape, led them to Anne Gonyo, his fake sister, in Umoja Estate, who was also arrested. Eventually, they both led the police to the other guys. Stephen Wambua was arrested in Kawangware, Stephen Kagia in Kibera, and David Njuguna in Waithaka. David Njuguna, upon his arrest, admitted to being at the scene of the crime, saying that he had been hired by the Rimbu. Upon further investigations, officers found that the Rimbu had recently deposited and then withdrawn a total of 1.5 million shillings from his bank account. They followed the money trail and his phone records, trying to determine the source of the money. They wondered, had the Rimbu been paid for the hit? They would then find 2 contacts in his phone that were in constant communication with him on the day of the murder. The 2 contacts belonged to 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, known as Rose Muruateto and Francis Muruateto. They discovered that the money seemed to have come from the Muruatetos. The officers kept following the money trail and it led them further to the Muruateto's other sister known as Elizabeth Gashanja. Elizabeth was said to have given the money to her brother and sister Rose Muruateto and Francis Muruateto. It was disclosed further that Elizabeth Gashanja was the wife of Wilson Gashanja, a former commissioner of lands in Kenya. It seemed that they had uncovered a connection in the murder because they soon found out that Wilson Gashanja and the late Magondu were known to each other. The rest of the suspects did not know Magondu personally. It came out that Wilson Gashanja was once a close friend of Magondu. Investigations hinted at a failing friendship between the 2 once close allies. This fueling suspicion of Wilson Gashanja's involvement in the crime. Speculations began that the 2 might have had a land deal that went sour, which would have been a hidden agenda to want to kill Magondu. It was rumored that Magondu had dubious dealings in land that the commissioner knew about and even took part in. And so, the mystery began to slowly unravel. Could the former land commissioner have sent people after Magondu to kill him? Magondu's office was found to have been ransacked the day he died. What were they looking for? The police had at least made progress in joining some dots. After a while, 12 people who were believed to be involved in the murder were arrested and charged with Magondu's murder. Among them, the former lands commissioner Wilson Gashanja and his wife Elizabeth Gashanja. These 2 were suspected to be the main people behind the murder and the persons who financed it. Miss Elizabeth Gashanja's siblings, that is Rose Njoki Muruateto and Francis Muruateto, were also arrested and implicated in this murder. They were suspected to have been the intermediaries who connected the Gashanjas to the actual killers. Arrested alongside the 4 were 8 other individuals believed to have been involved in the conspiracy and the murder itself. The trial began in 2004, but that was just the beginning of a long battle. As we will see, Wilson Gashanja was a powerful man in those days, being that he was a long-serving commissioner in the Moi era. He had left office in 1999, that is a year prior to this horrible murder, but he still had a lot of influence, especially when it came to land matters, which, as you have seen, was the deceased bread and butter. This case, I will say, did not go as smooth as expected. It was filled with drama and controversy and would go on to make headlines for many years to come, eventually becoming a landmark case in criminal matters in Kenya. I will cover what happened during trial, the outcome, and where this case stands as of today in the next part of this story. A lot happened afterwards, and I wouldn't want you to miss the most interesting part of the story. So please stay tuned for part 2. As usual, please do not forget to subscribe, to like, and to share this episode with other true crime junkies like yourself. See you right here on the next one.